Hello, everyone, and welcome to Backyard Farmer at Raising Nebraska building at the Nebraska State Fair. We always love coming to the fair. We have fabulous audiences. We always have a great show and a good time and a lot of corn dogs. However, this is a taped show, so we cannot take your questions by telephone because there aren't telephones. You can always send us an email at byf@unl.edu and byf@.unl, something like that. Anyway, you know what it is. And make sure you attach those pictures and tell us where you are from, please, please, please. You can also follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, and all that good stuff. So we're starting with death by spider, Jody.
So I wanted to bring something really cool, and I have to outdo myself like every week. So this week I brought a yellow garden spider. Let's see, can you see it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so sometimes these are called like golden garden spiders or zipper spiders. They are a type of orb weaver, so they spin a really, really large web. It's usually protected from the wind, but where there's a lot of prey. So they feed on other insects usually that fly in here. This spider, I just threw a Japanese beetle into the web, and so she spun it up and is probably saving it for later. But there's nothing to be afraid of these. They do a lot of good in the garden. They're very beautiful, and they may leave an egg sac that will hatch next spring, and they won't survive the winter. So, just enjoy them while you can. I learned how to say their genus name. It's Argiope. So it's that type of spider. And so just enjoy them.
And we have a beautiful one in the Backyard Farmer garden right now, which is fun. All right, Bill.
Okay, mine is not as exciting as that. But it's really an important thing, so I wanted to talk about it because to me, these things are confusing, and I am a turf grass professor. So you go out, we say spray your weeds like your dandelions and your creeping Charlie in the fall, and you're gonna go do it. And then you gotta go grab a hose end sprayer and possibly go broadcast spray your lawn. And so people have a lot of difficulty in understanding how to use these, and a lot of times they'll have a little setting on them where you can select what your output is. But even that's kind of confusing because if you walk really slow, then you're going to over apply product, and if you walk really fast, you're going to under apply the product and either get a dead lawn or not a dead weed. So how do you use these things effectively? The first thing you need to do is look at your label of the product you want to use and figure out how much material you have to put in per 1,000 square feet. So if you know your lawn's 1,000 square feet and it says put in 3 ounces of herbicide, put 3 ounces in here. And then you'd go out and you'd spray it. But again, it doesn't solve how fast to walk. So before you do that, just put water in here, straight water, and then pick a setting, and then go do a test and go spray your whole yard with just water and figure out how long did it take. And if you get through your whole yard and you still have product left, well, then you need to try a different setting, a lower setting or higher setting. So once you've got that dialed in so that you can go spray your whole lawn with just water in here, then you come in and you add however much herbicide or fertilizer or whatever you need to put down in the tank, and then you fill it up to the top, and then you go spray. So you have to know, 1, what the rate is of the product you want to apply, and then 2, what setting is ideal for your walking speed, because everybody walks at different rates. And when you have that dialed in, then you can safely apply those products to your lawn, your fertilizers or your herbicides to control those weeds like dandelion in a couple weeks.
Sounds like you are suggesting Fitbit for lawn sprayers.
It's kind of like that. You have to kind of figure out what your setting is for your lawn and then do that with just water first. And then once you're comfortable with that, then add that herbicide in and then go spray your yard so you have the right amount of material going out to kill that particular pest like that dandelion.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right, Amy, this is, shall we reveal where this came from?
This came from my garden, and I will have to tell everybody I had to fight off the mosquitoes to get to them this morning because it was calm and it wasn't raining, and they were attacking me by the millions. So luckily on the edge of my garden I have a row of beets, and we're getting to the time of year most of us are starting to pull our beets, but some of us like to eat the greens of the beets. That's not me. But if you look at my leaves here, I got a bunch of brown spots. And this is a common disease that we'll find on beets. This is Cercospora leaf spot. It is a disease that doesn't hurt us if you wanted to eat them, but this attacks our table beets. But people out in the panhandle will see this a lot on their sugar beets also. On sugar beets, it's very devastating and they will actually spray for it. So if you're looking at collard greens or your beet green tops that you want to eat, if you have a lot of this, you can go ahead and use it, or you can just remove those leaves. Typically, we're not going to do a fungicide application for this disease. It's favored by wet conditions. Surprise, surprise. That has been our summer. So we're getting a lot of fungal diseases in our beets this year. But Cercospora leaf blight.
All right, thanks, Amy. All right, we shan't tell where this one came from either, will we?
Oh, I'm going to. So I was walking in the Raising Nebraska garden and looking at all these lovely celotias, and this one is tall. Like, we're talking 3 or 4 foot tall, and this is supposed to be a plume type celotia. But as we were walking, those of you that have ever grown celotia before would be like, oh, that's a cockscomb. Wrong. That is fasciation, my friends. What happens is there's damage, whether it's mechanical damage or herbicide damage, and it causes this stem to flatten out. And so as that stem flattens out, we see that it gets wider and wider and wider, up to the point where we get the bloom on top. So here's the normal bloom next to the one that has the fasciation on it. And so that was why I had to pick this one, because I thought it was super cool. There are some cockscomb type celotias out there, and their stem's gonna be small, and they're gonna have this kind of flower head on it. But like I said, this one had the fun fasciation on it, so it just fanned out, and it made its own cockscomb type.
Perfect, and just to enjoy, right?
Just to enjoy and look at, and they do make good cut flowers if you put them in water.
All right. Thank you, Elizabeth. All right, your first picture question, Jody. This is a viewer in Norfolk, and they have garden phlox. They've been looking diseased. They've had beautiful foliage. This year they look like this, and he found this critter on it. So what does he do?
Okay, well, this is a phlox plant bug, so it explains why the phlox is not looking so good. So it's a true bug, so it's got a piercing, sucking mouth part, and what it does is it pierces into the leaves and sucks at the sap, so you'll get that stippling, which is what it looks like. Right now, you can probably pick them off, shop vacuum if you want to. We don't usually recommend insecticides for these. It would be mostly scouting earlier in the season if you were going to treat them. Is there another question?
So yes, now you have what are these disgusting insects on my zucchini plants?
Okay, so we have a problem with these all over, with a lot of the squash and zucchini and pumpkin. So these are squash bugs, and there are many overlapping generations. You can see a few adults in here, and they look like they're mating. You can see little tiny nymphs riding other nymphs. So there are so many on here. They are also true bugs, so that sucking mouth part. So they're sucking the sap out of the squash plants, and they make it really wilty, and sometimes they really do kill the plant. What you can do next year is like crop rotation, row covers. You can hand pick them off right now. And you can also do some trapping with newspaper in the garden. They'll crawl in there, and then you can collect them, put them in soapy water. But yeah, squash bugs are not fun. And usually that's when the point where most people start having to treat their squash plants for insecticide.
Thanks, Jody. Okay, Bill, this is actually a Seward viewer. They have weeds prevalent in their lawn, obviously, and what they want to know is what are the weeds, how to control them.
Yep.
Can they do that in time to still seed this fall?
So I see 3 different problems here. 2 of them are weeds, and 1 of them is no grass, right? So the number 1 problem here is we just don't have a dense stand of grass, and that's made an opening for our creeping Charlie / ground ivy, which is the broadleaf, and then we have also some crabgrass there. So knowing life cycle is important. The crabgrass is going to be a summer annual. It's going to die pretty soon. What I'd recommend for that one is just keep mowing it to try to prevent too much seed from getting there. And next year you might need to do a pre-emergence herbicide if you don't have that grass filled in. The broadleaf weed, the creeping Charlie, is a perennial. And so that's one that we're going to treat in the fall. We're still too early to treat it. We're going to see very poor control if we go out and try to kill it right now, unless we're using a non-selective herbicide like Roundup, which would kill both the ground ivy and the the crabgrass, which would be a good thing to do if you're going to seed. So if you're going to seed, you want to round all that up, trying to get it out of there, and then seed into it, get a nice dense lawn. And that would be my recommendation to try to get that area to be filled, is just to do a non-selective and then seed, because our seeding window is wide open for the whole state. Get some grass there, and then next year, if you see these weeds still persisting, going out with selective herbicide, or make sure you use a pre-emergence herbicide for that crabgrass.
All right, thanks, Bill. Okay, Amy, you have several cucumber questions.
Okay.
The first is an Omaha viewer, and she planted her cukes in the raised bed. They're doing this, and we think this might have something to do with Jody, but does it have to do with you?
This is not disease related. This is actually scarring, probably from an insect chewing away.
Yeah,
Some
so
sort. So there isn't a lot you can do. The nice thing is that all the scarring is only on the outside, so you can just peel them and you can eat your cucumbers with no problems.
all right, and then you have a couple here that are, these are in Lincoln in a raised bed.
Okay.
They're deformed. Would an insect do this? Because she did see Japanese beetles.
So we can see, if you go back to the first picture that they shown, you got the little pickling cucumbers on there, and they have the spines and they're black. There's some varieties that are just going to give you that coloration. There's nothing wrong with those pickling cucumbers. You can still eat them with no problems. Now, you got some leaves that are a little deformed. Now, the leaf deformation could be due to a herbicide drift. It could be due to overwater. There's multiple things that could be causing it. But overall, the plant looks fairly healthy.
All right, so
Can I say that
Sure.
that is a bee? So don't blame the bee. The bee is just getting food. from
He's
the
helping
plant.
us.
So
He's
that,
pollinating,
yes,
so we have
it's
more,
not a bad
more
one.
cucumbers.
yeah, they thought it was a Japanese beetle as opposed to a bee.
Yeah.
All right, so Elizabeth, you get the next set of questions here. Honey locust, and this is McPherson County, and there are 3 pictures on this particular one. Very large tree, shows good shade. I think the second picture shows some pretty dead, sort of looking nasty branches in it. And then the third one is really kind of what's going on. So do we have any idea on what's going on with this honey locust?
You know, so as we look at the honey locust right now, we're seeing those white patches on the undersides of the limbs. That's fungal infection. More than likely those limbs are dead. That's why we're seeing that. Now as we look at those deformed leaves, what we're looking at with some of those deformed leaves is we could be looking at some type of herbicide injury, whether it's a growth regulator like 2,4-D or a product like dicamba. Sometimes we can see that. The reason we are leaning more that way is because it's the newest, most growth that's affected. So if you look back in the tree and some of those other leaves they're not as deformed, they look fairly natural, they look like they haven't been affected, then that's when we're leaning more toward herbicide injury. Now, the hard part is with herbicide injury is we don't know the answer as to how that tree is going to come out of it, because it really depends on what product it was, how much it got, the whiff that it got, the wind speed, all that type of things play a role into that. So the best thing you could do for those trees is just make sure they have adequate moisture. Not been a problem. But we shoot for about 1 inch of supplemental moisture. Now, honey locusts are pretty tough.
Right.
But it's just going to be a waiting game to see how they come out of it into next year.
And I think you have one more picture, if I'm not mistaken. And if you do, this is somebody who has a maple, and he did say for these particular curl leaves that Roundup was sprayed in the vicinity.
Yep, and that's where we see those endmost leaves. They're cupping, curly, distorted, fan-shaped. That's when we start to notice we have that herbicide injury. And again, it's just going to be a waiting game to see what happens. You know, it all depends on how much of the tree it was applied to, and then what the concentration was and things like that. Most of the time, we're going to see that next year how it comes out of it. So if we have way more fruit than normal, or we have way more cones than normal, or things like that, then we know that tree is kind of having its last gasp type of a thing. It's just going to be a waiting game, and just don't apply fertilizer and just shoot for about 1 inch of supplemental moisture a week.
All right, thank you, Elizabeth. Well, back in July, we traveled up towards St. Paul to visit Prairie River Honey Farm and Conservation Blueprint to talk about their great collaboration that is supporting both pollinators and our honeybee populations.
I first started Prairie River Honey Farm. It was about 2011 and started as a hobby in actually my parents' backyard. And I developed a passion for nature and had the desire to become my own business owner.
So Conservation Blueprint has been around for 3 years, provides pollinator seed, designs pollinator seed mixtures, and to work with people on establishing, managing, designing great pollinator habitat. They're a sideline beekeeper, it's a business. I'm a hobbyist, and we met and we talked bees. That's what beekeepers do, we talk bees. And they talked about how they were having a hard time accessing good, high quality forage.
Pete Berthelsen was able to contact the Matthews in St. Paul here, which is where the hives are located. And that's right next to a wildlife management area that has pollinator habitat, and it's several hundred acres, so it's actually a perfect place to put the bees. With the honeybees, like the #1 crucial pollinator, I think it's estimated that over 1/3 of the food that people consume is pollinated by honeybees.
Honeybees are the #1 most iconically recognized insects.
It's the queen bee right there. Well, when you first get to a beehive, you have to be really still and present with the bees because they can sense whenever the hive is being disturbed.
It just went up my sleeve.
Once you open up the hive, you really slow down and just see thousands of bees working, and from different jobs of raising brood to bring in honey and pollen. And you can just see the whole hierarchy of the bees working together.
They hibernate, they migrate. Honeybees stay alive all the way through the winter. And that's what they're storing and making honey, is to get through that period when they don't leave the hive. It's incredible.
The honey is pure and ready to be harvested.
People are interested in products that are produced locally and have those benefits. There's also all kinds of benefits that we think are in having local honey for people that have hay fever and reactions to that some of the pollen that is in that honey can help with those issues.
It's pretty amazing to actually taste the raw honey that the bees produce from Nebraska. And when we give consumers samples of it, they say it's the best honey they've ever tasted in their lives. So I think that's really satisfactory to provide a pure raw product to the consumer.
It's really important to think about species that are going to do well in your area, and then think about what your objectives are. I kind of put things into 3 categories. I want to just benefit honeybees, I want to benefit things like monarch butterflies, or I want to benefit all pollinators. That's how we would design and think about the seed mixture that we would do for a project. If there's existing grass, we need to remove that competition, because most of the wildflower species we want to use are kind of gentle and they need a little elbow room as they're getting started. So we want to really think about our site preparation, the design of the mixture, and then how we've planted it.
You know, putting on that bee suit in 100-degree weather, I think our producers who did that really need a shout out. And you'll notice how absolutely beautiful that part of Nebraska is. So that was really great to see. Elizabeth says yes.
It is awesome.
All right, so your next set of picture questions, Jody. This is, she knows what it is, but she thought we might like to see it. What is it and what does it do?
Yeah, so we're actually pretty famous in Nebraska for having these, but this is a cow killer ant, which is actually a female wasp. So it's all named wrong, and it hasn't killed any cows. But it does have a very painful sting. If you handle it or step on it, it does have a stinger. So female, I guess, wasps and ants, they have stingers because it's a modified ovipositor, so that's what they use to lay their eggs. Basically, they're really cool because they've got really thick exoskeleton, very hairy, and if you pick them up, not that I would recommend that, they actually squeak, so they have a lot of defense mechanisms. And they're a parasitic solitary wasp that lays their eggs in other wasps' nests, and then their larvae consume the larvae of the other wasp.
Very cool. And you have another one that is wondering what this bee is. Never noticed one like this before, and this is in Omaha.
Okay, so this is not a bee. This is a hummingbird clearwing. So it's not a hummingbird either. It is a moth, a day-flying moth that feeds on nectar. Very beautiful, and it's got clear wings. Yeah, enjoy those. We've got quite a few sphinx moths that are very beautiful nectaring these days.
Wonderful. All right. Bill, this is Beatrice Viewer for your next picture.
Okay.
And she says, what is this weed in her Southern Gage County native grass field, and how can she get rid of it?
Yep, so this is wild licorice, something that I don't see a lot in the turf world, but it is, it's a legume, so it means it's good. It adds nitrogen to the soil, and it's native. And so I was talking to Amy a little bit about this from a forage perspective. Normally we'd say we just leave it because it is a native and it's natural. And
Cattle don't like it. They won't eat it. You can manage it with herbicides, but the big thing is when we look at pasture management, just like in a lawn, if you overgraze it, then these other species are going to move in. So forage management, grazing management for cattle is critical, so you don't get it too short, so then wild licorice and other woody plants don't move in.
And overgrazing for a lawn is mowing too short and mowing not frequently enough. So it does transcend both forage and grass lawn management, yeah.
All right, so just enjoy and manage that pasture lawn better, right?
Exactly. Go manage your pasture.
All right, Amy, this is a viewer, Raymond area around Branched Oak. She has silver maples, and she's had these sort of spots and lesions on this tree for the last 2 years.
Okay.
So she did send a series of pictures, which is good, because this is not our usual little gall on.
It is not our typical gall, and the name, we're not very creative. It's black spot on maple. So there's several different fungi species that fit in that black spot, and this one just happens to have a red sporulation on the underside of the leaf. So it is favored by wet conditions. That's going to be my common saying for today, and it has been all summer. It isn't a disease that typically causes a lot of problems in our maple. It will cause these black spots. We can get some premature defoliation. Typically, it doesn't recommend a fungicide application. The big thing is going to be sanitation this fall. We want to remove as many of those leaves as possible because that's how the spores are going to overwinter. And your maple should come back just fine next year.
All right. Is this something you see also, Elizabeth, the same sort of thing? No, not in your area? Nope. You just see the galls. All right, so your next one is a Valparaiso viewer, and it's squash 1, 2, 3. All of them are mysteries. She's wondering, what are they? Bush squash, something else, yellow straight neck. What does she have in all three of these?
So some of these squash, like the last one, what we can have is we can have a squash that's called Zephyr. It's got a green end, and then it's got the rest of it is yellow. The second one, it could be one of our winter squashes called Carnival. It could also be one of our edible husk or edible pumpkin type ones called, I think, I'm going to call it khaki, but that's not right. It's spelled that way. That's how I say it. And so the first one is one of the edible summer squashes. So when it comes to squashes, the first year that you plant it, you will get the squash that you planted if you buy new seed. If you try to save the seed from the squash for the following year, that's when we see it start to cross-pollinate, and you might or might not get the same squash you got the previous year because you get what we call that seedling variety cross-pollination. So I had one that I left out in my garden. It was supposed to be an heirloom squash. It cross-pollinated with my pumpkins. Now I have very ugly pumpkins. So, you know, if you want it to remain true, what you have to do is you have to play the honeybee, and you have to pollinate with the male flower, with the female flower, so you get the variety that you want, or you spend the $2 and get a new packet of seeds.
All right, thank you, Elizabeth. She could eat those, though. Maybe yes, no, it depends.
Yes, you can eat the first one and the last one as a summer squash. The middle one, you're going to want to let that rind harden up and then save it as a winter squash.
All right, thanks. Well, our season really is winding down. It feels great, but it's unfortunate for the end of the gardening world. Maybe you are ready to harvest or finishing harvest. you're discovering that you need to manage your soil and improve your soil. So let's use a cover crop, and here is Terry James to talk about cover crops in our backyard farmer garden.
This week in the Backyard Farmer Garden, we're going to talk about kind of what we're going to do for the fall. We have a handful of empty spaces like we've talked. We've been harvesting, sending all of our produce to the donation to the food pantry here in the East Campus area. But we have some bare spots. So we're actually going to put a ground cover in, and we're using oats. Oats will sprout very quickly for us. They'll grow. The great thing about oats is that they will die over the winter. So if we can't get that turned over right away in our garden, we're not going to have to worry about them sprouting again next spring. If you want to try a cover crop in your backyard, try looking for oats. You can find them really easily online and get a small pound or so ordered, and it'll go a long way. So stop by the Backyard Farmer Garden and check out our cover crops.
Oats are one option. You have lots of other options, and we actually did a Digging Deeper segment about cover crops. So you can go online and go to YouTube and look at that and see what else that our experts have recommended. All right, Jody, just a regular old question. This is a viewer that says, have you ever seen a bagworm that wasn't on a tree? And how do they get there, and what do you do about them?
Okay, I have seen bagworms everywhere, and this season the bagworms have gone completely crazy. We've seen bagworms without bags, like naked bagworms on campus. But they crawl up there, so a lot of times people will pick them off, or they will release silk and drop down onto a car or onto the ground. And then just like a caterpillar that's half in the bag, they just crawl around with their thoracic legs to wherever they need to be. We've seen them up poles all over the place, so that's how they get there. So that's why when you pick the bagworms off the plant, you want to destroy them. You have to step on them or drown them in soapy water. If you let them stay in a pile, your pile will not be there when you get back later.
All right, thanks. Okay, Bill, this is a great mowing question, actually. This is a viewer in Papillion that has tall fescue turf.
Yep.
He says he understands normal mowing height is about 3 inches, but he's saying there are guidelines for first and last mowings of the season, which is cutting it down to 1.5 inches.
Yep, that's not true. And it is very commonly stated, though. So it's not like he's making something up. We actually tested that when I was an undergrad researcher. And we mowed and we didn't mow going into winter. And the grass that we didn't mow had a bunch of snow mold in Madison, Wisconsin. And the grass that we scalped down, we scalped all that sugar away. And what happened? It didn't have enough sugar to regrow in the spring, and it was dead. So what we want to do is just maintain our same mowing heights and maintain right until the grass stops growing. And then when that grass is done, take the mower, change the oil, sharpen the blade, put it away for next year. Don't, scalp it down or let it get too high, because that just actually leads to more problems out of the winter.
All right, and he actually also has this kind of a follow-up related question, which is, are you supposed to take off 1/4 of a blade or 1/3 of a blade or 1/4 of an inch? What is that?
Yeah, we actually tested it because it's one of those things that's been cited for decades and never really tested. And mowing to remove 1/3 of the leaf is ideal. If you mow more frequently, that generally doesn't hurt the grass. It actually makes it denser. But if you're mowing and you're removing more than 1/3 of the leaf, that causes problems. And it's really tough right now with all the rain that we've had. I mowed my yard in Lincoln. I had to bump my mower up to 4 inches because it was bogging down and I was scalping and opening up holes for weeds to come in like annual bluegrass. So we need to be a little bit flexible with how we are managing our mowing heights when we get behind because of the rainfall.
All right, thanks, Bill.
Yeah.
Okay, Amy, you could have brought this in, but you didn't. So what is going on with the peonies?
What's going on with the peonies? They're probably white and gross and disgusting. It is our wonderful friend powdery mildew. Peonies are notorious for getting powdery mildew. Powdery mildew is one of those unique fungi that doesn't like actual free moisture on the leaf. It likes high humidities. And with all the rains that we've been getting throughout the state, and also just being Nebraska, 90% humidity is pretty much common for the summer. So we're to that time of year. It's a great time. I deadheaded my peonies finally last weekend. So we're getting to that point that you can just cut off part of those peonies, start doing our winter cleanup with them, and just clean it and remove it, and you're going to have it come back next year. You can do preventative fungicide applications, however, they're continuous, and typically I personally don't feel it's worth the time. Just enjoy the white powdery growth, and just know it's that time of year that we're supposed to start thinking about cleaning up our gardens and our flower beds.
And can you put that material in the compost pile?
You can definitely put it in the compost pile just because those spores are everywhere. So go ahead and compost it. Make sure your compost is coming to the right temperature, just in case you have some of those other rotsies and spots that are in there that you don't want to be spreading around.
All right, thanks, Amy. All right, Elizabeth, this is a viewer in Bellevue, and they want to know, will preen on a bed with spring flowering bulbs harm the bulbs? So preen as a...
As in the pre-emergent preen?
As in the pre-emergent.
The pre-emergence, sorry.
Right.
So with those pre-emergent herbicides, what they're going to do is they stop seeds from sprouting. And so where those spring flowering bulbs are coming from a bulb, not from a seed, it shouldn't have an effect on those bulbs, and it shouldn't harm them.
All right, so she can go ahead and preen away.
I would wait till spring. There's not a lot of weeds that we have this fall other than henbit that's going to be a winter annual, maybe some mustards or things like that.
Yeah.
But I'd save it till spring and go ahead and put it down early.
All right, thanks, Elizabeth. Well, we need to take a short break, but stay with us. There's the lightning, or not the lightning round, the plant of the week, and much more Backyard Farmer right after this. Welcome back to Backyard Farmer. Remember, this is a taped program, so we cannot take your calls. You can still send us those emails on those pictures, byf@unl.edu. Coming up later on in the show, we're going to hear about how FFA and 4-H are wonderful programs that do so much for the youth, and of course, then those youth grow up to be big people, as have some of the people that are sitting on the panel. But right now, we have Plants of the Week with Elizabeth, who's going to hold her hands very still.
I am, I'm not gonna move. So I've got a couple really nice fall blooming plants of the week. And so we're gonna start off with our lovely one right here. This is a solid aster, and you can't really tell, but this is yellow down here. What it is it's a cross between a goldenrod, which is a solidago, and an aster. And so what it does is it'll be about 18 inches tall, west facing, likes it hot. This guy does really well, and it is a good cut flower as well. As it kind of sits in the sun for a little bit, it starts to turn a little bit more white. But this one is a really fun one. Again, like I said, 18 inches tall, likes it hot, likes it dry, does really well. The other one, I mean, how can you go throughout fall without noticing some of the sedums? You know, the old standard is the Autumn Joy sedum. There's some other ones called Autumn Fire. There's another one that has a variegation around the outside, and just so you're aware, Kim has told me that they start to revert back, which means that they won't always have the variegation on them. But the Autumn Joy sedum is one of the ones where it doesn't look like much for most of the season until we get to fall, and then it starts to bloom. Then all the pollinators come, and it's a really fun one. So that's one that does really well for our area. So the Autumn Joy, and then we also have the solid aster.
Excellent, thank you, Elizabeth. All right, a couple of insect questions, of course. Jody, for you, your first one is, these insects are on these leaves in mead. What are they? And we had 2 or 3 pictures. People send us pictures of these little caterpillars.
Yeah, every week.
Yeah.
And they seem to be doing great. But people don't like them because they can really defoliate. So these are caterpillars of the checker spot butterfly. And unfortunately, we just don't get to enjoy the butterfly at the same time, so we don't see the connection. But you can't have beautiful butterflies if you don't have the caterpillars. They do feed gregariously like this in a big group for the first couple instars of their caterpillar life, and then they spread out and they'll go pupate. But that's what they are. They love coneflower and Rudbeckia sunflower.
All right, and your second one is another, any idea what this is?
Oh yeah, it's the season, so anyone who's growing milkweed, thank you, but these are large milkweed bugs. We've got a bunch of different bugs that love milkweed. These ones, when they grow up, these are all nymphs. When they grow up and they've got wings, there's a black band across them. They feed on the seed, but they shouldn't do anything to harm the milkweed, and they shouldn't do anything to ruin your monarch food.
All right, and your third one, she said she found this when she opened a window that had not been opened for several years.
Okay, I don't really know what these are. I can see a few little exoskeleton from carpet beetle larvae in there, but then for scale, I'm not really sure how big those round things are and if they are beetles or if they were ever living. So feel free to send me a picture, or if you still have this specimen, or if you've got some scale to see how big they were, so I can try to figure out what they are.
All right, and they're dead, so that's a good start, right?
They are.
Vacuum them up.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. All right, Bill, this is a viewer who wants to know, he's got this type of, he's calling it grass,
Yep.
invading his lawn, long stiff blades. He's been able to eradicate it from his landscape beds, but he cannot seem to get it out of his fescue lawn.
Yep, this is a weed that our latest PhD student, Lucci Lee, Dr. Lucci Lee now, was studied for his PhD research. It's yellow nutsedge. Sedges are always easy to identify from our grasses, because when you roll them through your fingers at the base, you'll feel they're triangle shaped. They are really tough to kill in the summertime. They're perennial warm season plants, and so they are really beefed up, ready for winter right now. And so if we try to kill them, there's a lot of sugar stored in these little storage organs called nutlets that are down in the ground. And so we're trying to control these. We have to do it really, really early in their life cycle when they reemerge, which is generally in late May. So take note of where it is. And then next year, like put on a calendar even, like look for this weed, yellow nutsedge. If you then start to see it emerging, then you need to go out with a herbicide like Sedgehammer, which is cool. Another one that works is called a Roundup for Lawns, not Roundup, Roundup for Lawns. It has sulfentrazone in there that will kill this particular weed. The other thing too is you don't, it does favor kind of wet soil, but it really favors open areas of grass. And so not maintaining good density, this thing will take over rapidly, and that's why we see it so obvious right now. So think about treating when you first see it in late May next year, and hope to try and knock down some of this vigorous weed.
All right, and I think he actually sent us a picture that was pretty obvious on that one too, so
Yeah.
that's pretty obvious.
Yeah, and one thing that Lucci did find is even though plucking it is probably one of the best things you can do right now, we thought maybe it would make it mad and you'd see an increase in density, and that's not
Yeah.
the case. So
Yeah.
if you can pull it out, that's one thing that it actually can help.
Right. All right, so our next one is actually tomatoes for you. This is not your picture, Bill, so this comes up, I think, later. But we talked about what this was. And so we have Amy with her mortgage lifter tomatoes.
With the tomatoes now.
And she's wondering what those bumps were, but the real question is not what the bumps are. The real question is what's wrong with the tomato. So what are the bumps?
What are the bumps? The bumps will actually turn into roots.
Yeah.
So that's the great thing about tomatoes. That's the reason why when you transplant them, you bury them deep, because then you get more roots, and with more roots, you get more tomato production, because there's a lot of food and nutrients and water going up into the plant. But as you see the whole tomato plant, it's pretty sad, pretty brown, pretty wilted. If you take a closer look at one of the pictures, you can see the leaves. This is the cause of early blight. This is early blight that started probably back in late May, early June, and it's gradually worked up the plant. And early blight is one of those that will just devastate tomatoes if given the opportunity. Management for early blight, we're going to talk about mulching, trying to remove that leaf to soil contact. We're also, with it around the cages itself, there is some research that shows that the spores can actually overwinter on your cages. So when we get ready to pull everything out this fall and cleaning it up, actually taking like Clorox wipes or hand sanitizers, or dipping your cages right into a 10% bleach solution to kill those spores have been shown to help reduce that amount of early blight that you'll have next year. The other trick is look at a different variety. There's lots of resistant varieties out there that you can handle all the early blight that's always found into your garden.
And mortgage lifter isn't one of them. And you have some other questions also that are nasty tomatoes, I think. Lime green salad tomato. This is in Dwight. A few days ago looked great, and a few days later looks like this.
So
showed up.
So you can see a little bit of early blight on there. Again, the blighting of the leaves, that dark brown border, that light tan center, most likely early blight. The other thing I would be concerned with this one, with how quickly it went down, is potentially some verticillium wilt or a crown rot, because it, according to the person who sent the picture, it wilted very quickly and melted down. And typically early blight's not going to do that as quickly, so I would probably want to remove that plant because it's most likely a crown rot of some sort.
All right, thanks, Amy. All right, Elizabeth, this particular viewer with these pictures has prickly pear, inherited them and doesn't know what to do with them. They flower beautifully, they're starting to grow out of their safely contained space, and they're starting to rot in the middle. So he's wondering how to prune and manage, and then how to maybe start in another place.
Very carefully.
Yeah, with fireplace tongs.
You know, you don the lovely rose gloves that are all leather. You get the lovely tongs that go to the barbecue grill, and you go in and you remove whatever you can that's dead. That's going to be your best bet. Now with cactus, if you wanted to start another cactus, what you need to do is you need to cut off some of those pads and you let it sit, like for days up to a week, and you let it scab over before you start to try to root it. It needs to be sure that it's got good and callous tissue before you start to try to root it. I would do that just as insurance to make sure that I don't kill the mother plant, because that would be my luck. But with that, remove what you can that's dead. I'd try to start some other ones around there, and then it would fill in a little better and maybe not be so strung out across that bed.
All right, thanks, Elizabeth. Well, 4-H and FFA have been organizations that have been around for a very long time, and they do an absolutely fabulous job of building integrity, character, and creativity into those young people. So let's hear for a minute about a family that has really benefited from being in those organizations.
I joined FFA when I was a freshman in high school. We moved to Gothenburg when I was becoming a freshman, and one of the main reasons we moved to a new school was my dad wanted me to get into FFA. My dad was graduated from Gothenburg, and he was also in the FFA chapter there in Gothenburg. It was struggling moving to a new school, but being able to join a chapter with 80+ members in it was very welcoming. Alongside my brother was in it, and having my dad previously in the chapter was a guiding experience.
A few things that would be attractive to the younger generations and their parents as well, to get them involved in 4-H and FFA at a young age, or even at the age they're currently at, all the way up through high school, would definitely be the fact that you can learn so much more than you would have ever if you didn't. That being where your food really comes from, the advantages and disadvantages of living and working on a farm. You know, it really made a lot easier for my life to springboard into my career today, because I had the background that I had, and all the relationships that you meet in this organization and in FFA, 4-H, those organizations really leads you into some very unique opportunities into your life.
Probably the biggest thing about FFA was learning leadership responsibilities, just typical things of being in a leadership role. I believe FFA and 4-H develops a work ethic in adolescence that is not necessarily given in just open circumstances of the world today. The responsibility of getting up every morning and every evening to feed a livestock, or no matter what kind of project you have, the responsibility of meeting deadlines, and just all in all being responsible for your actions.
I believe you should join FFA and 4-H to gain an incredible life experience through showing an animal, baking a good, growing something from start to finish. You gain knowledge, a skill, and the overall experience of what FFA and 4-H can do for an individual, and not only an individual, but an entire family.
So here we are at the State Fair, which we absolutely love, and that just happened to have been our intern out here for Raising Nebraska this summer, who is one of those 4-H people, which was just great. Many of you probably had a similar experience, and you can really attest to the fact that those are really great organizations. So, and by the way, if you want more information, contact your local extension office, right? So that's a good way to get into it. All right, picture questions. Jody. The first one is, what is this beautiful insect?
This is a giant mayfly. What else do you want to know about it?
Is it good?
Like
is
I
it
just talked
bad?
too much.
Yeah.
It's good, except that when we have mayfly hatches, there's like millions and millions and millions of them, so that's when they become not good. But I mean, they're aquatic. They signify a very clean environment, clean water. They live maybe a few hours to a couple days. So the order's Ephemeroptera, which means they're ephemeral. So you enjoy them while you can, unless they're in by the millions.
And I think people think the long tail end is a stinger. That's why they always...
No stinger.
Yeah.
It's just...
Yeah, is.
Yeah, they're pretty helpless.
Cool.
Very cool, pretty.
All right, your next one is a visitor to a garden.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Well, that's not the one I had, but this is the Argiope spider, the yellow garden spider, and you can see that web. One cool thing is that that zigzag, so sometimes they call it the zigzag spider. She's got this silk that goes through like that in the web, and scientists actually argue why it's there. It's called a stabilimentum, so you think it's to stabilize it, but they may think it's to camouflage or stabilize it or to distract predators, so they're not sure, but that's one of the characteristics of their really cool web.
All right, and your third one is a viewer who wants to know whether this fine webbing on their little globe blue spruce is good, bad, or just there.
This looks like a funnel weaver spider, so they build these sheet webs, and they're kind of all over right now, like in the lawns, right, and shrubs and bushes and stuff like that. If you look closely, you might be able to see the funnel where the spider is hiding, and it's not a sticky web. You can tear it down if you want. You'll just build a new one the next day. But I would say, because I love spiders and I think they're beneficial, that it's good.
All right, thanks, Jody. Okay, Bill, so your first turf question is the one with the giant circles in it, and then smaller circles, and the viewer wants to know what's going on here.
To me, this looks like a fairy ring just because of how the circles look. It could be other things, and so if you really wanted to know, you can send it in a sample. What happens with fairy ring is that there's fungi that are decomposing organic matter. It's bringing a big increase in growth rate. And what can happen when the grass grows really vigorously is it can make oils and waxes that can get on the soil, and it prevents water from getting back into those spots. And so it becomes hydrophobic. And then it dries out because it's hydrophobic and starts to die in patches like that. Other things to think about would be like necrotic ring spot or summer patch. Those could be diseases killing but based on how that one looks, I'm not convinced that it's not just a fairy ring situation.
All right.
Yep.
Thanks, Bill. Your next one is a viewer from Henderson. Cut the stolons on their buffalo grass and then sort of put them you can see that in the top of the image there, kind of laid them like a sod.
Yep.
And then did some plugs at the same time. So was the timing good? How does he care for this?
It's a little tough. It's not the ideal timing for buffalo grass. It's a warm season grass, so we'd want to establish that in the spring going into the summer. That said, those plugs have a good shot of making it. We've plugged into September before and had good success, knowing that next year it's probably going to continue to tighten up. So don't want to force it right now. It should be okay. Those stolons on top look kind of dry. I'd be really surprised if they would make it through the winter. Plugs have a much better shot. And ultimately, if they don't, doing the same thing again in the spring is going to be the better timing as we go into the summer, as opposed to being at the tail end that we are right now.
All right, thanks, Bill. All right, Amy, we've had these two before, but you get them again. The first one is, this is on an ornamental pear. What is it and what to do? And the second one is on an American hawthorn.
It is our wonderful cedar blank rust. So cedar hawthorn, cedar quince, cedar apple, cedar pear, take your pick. It's one of those wonderful rust diseases that infects in the spring by the spores being produced on the cedar trees and those little dry head, mummy, shrunken head galls on the cedars that then get the orange tendrils and look like octopuses, and those produce the spores that go to our cedar, hawthorn, apple, pear, quince, you name it. And on the second picture, you can see there's little structures coming out from the bottom. That's producing the spores that go back to the cedar trees to perform those galls. There's nothing we can do with them at this point in time. Take note of it. Next spring, as the leaves are starting to unfurl, that's when you're going to spray. And depending on how much rain we get, how wet of a spring, it may be a single application, or like this year, it would have been a 3 or 4 application just because of how long we were wet and how cool we were and how long those spores were being produced. Or replace it with a resistant variety and you don't have to worry about it at all.
Exactly. And should those leaves go in the compost pile or not?
They can go in the compost pile. It's not a big deal since it can't reinfect those apple trees again.
All right, thanks, Amy. Okay, Elizabeth, you have a couple of tree questions. This is a 4 to 5 year old weeping willow. This is Southwest Iowa viewer. Notice damaged bark from the base coming loose. She's wondering about tree wrap. Not as bad on the other side, but it's bulging and loosening. What do we say on this particular willow?
So anytime we see that bark is not attached and it's plating and flaking off, there's no water or nutrient movement happening in that spot. And so we're probably going to see that bottom lower part, the bark's going to exfoliate off. If the tree's in overall good health and in good condition, it's going to make callus tissue and it's going to try to seal over that wound. It's always going to be there. Based on the species, my guess is it could try, but I don't think it's probably going to get it before the tree starts to go downhill. So I wouldn't put too much effort into that tree, unfortunately. I'd enjoy it while I had it, but more than likely we're going to see that tree, because it's a willow and it's fast growing, it's also going to die fairly quickly too. So it's probably going to lose that one.
All right, and then we have a viewer in Murdoch, has several of these. He does say he lives on an acreage, weather can take a toll.
You're probably going to lose these too. I'm the bearer of good news today. So anytime we have more than 1/3 of the trunk that's affected by whether the bark's removed or we've had damage in some way, that tree is going to be really stressed. And we're going to see on that side where that trunk damage is at, we're going to see the most stress. So it's either going to have smaller than normal leaves or more than normal fruit production on that side. Could drop its leaves earlier than normal on that side. Unfortunately, with both instances, the damage has already been done to that tree, and so your only hope is for that callus tissue. Now, there was a little bit of swollen tissue on either side of that wound, and again, that's a big wound for that little tree to try to cover. And so eventually, probably, you will see that tree kind of struggle as we go. With both trees, it's just make sure they have adequate moisture. Shoot for about 1 inch of supplemental moisture a week. We don't want to fertilize trees when they're stressed, and we especially don't want to fertilize trees right now as we're getting ready for fall.
You're way nicer than I am. I just said cut it down.
Well, yeah, I understand. Leave it in until your replacement gets big enough or it dies completely.
All right, thank you, Elizabeth. Well, of course, we always have announcements of fun things going on in the gardening world. The first is the Forest Festival Family Fun Night Friday with the Nebraska Forest Service. 5 to 10 p.m. at Horning State Farm. That should be fun if you can say it fast. And then we have another great one, Art in the Garden, which is sponsored by the Noise Art Gallery, Saturday the 14th, 11 to 7 in the Sunken Gardens in Lincoln. We, of course, have our Grow a Row, which is our produce donations. We are still taking those donations from 5 to 7 p.m. in the Backyard Farmer Garden. And we have, of course, our Produce from the Heart donations totals for August. Backyard Farmer Garden, 1,000 pounds. Grow a Row, 195 pounds, which is great. And then there is Digging Deeper. You can watch us on Facebook, Sundays, 6:30 p.m. at Central Time. Follow us on Backyard Farmer and NET Nebraska, which is great. Then the final one is ours, which is our finale. We will be in the garden live again September 8th, Sunday, September 8th. Audience Q&A at 1 p.m. Central. The show is at 2. The weather will be absolutely perfect.
Is that guaranteed?
Guaranteed.
Okay.
Absolutely. Better be. All right, we have about a minute. So Jody, I'm going to ask you a question that came to us from a viewer who read an article about jumping worms being the latest invasive species, and they're in Chicago. What do we know or think about jumping worms?
Yeah, and I did read that article because it was put out by the Invasive Species Group out of UNL, but they're called Asian jumping worms from Asia. They were found in Wisconsin. They're really bad because although we like earthworms and none of them are native, They actually do such a good job with, like, I don't know, recycling, that they leave the soil with no nutrients, and so you can't grow anything, and it's pretty bad. But if you see them, you should report them. They are, well, they're called Asian jumping worms. They're crazy worms. They jump like snakes. They move all crazy, and it should be like, you know, don't move soil around, don't import soil. Make sure when you're moving things like that to wash your tools and things like that. But
All right, let it go.
Yes.
All right, well, and unfortunately, that is all the time we do have for Backyard Farmer.